Hello class, hey, it's Miss Akerd, and I wanted to show you guys a little bit about a watercolor project that we will be doing in our classroom this year. This is a watercolor technique where we are going to be using various different styles to create a very soft looking painting. So what we're going to do is use a technique called wet on wet. And essentially what that is putting wet pigment into wet paper. So what I've done here is I've set up on my little station with my pencil and my pen. We're going to be using the pen later, so we'll just go ahead and set that aside. And then what I did was I took black masking or blue masking tape and taped off the area. That way my pigment can run to the masking tape, but then that way I'll have a nice clean sharp edge. So this is just a basic square here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch out a water scene with a mountain kind of in the background. So we want to make sure that we have our mountain range, and I'm just sketching very lightly with my pencil so that the lead does not kind of peek through the surface of the paint and that we see our sketch marks. I'm just going very, very light with the mountains here. All right, so this is going to be kind of the base of our mountains, and then we have our water that's going to come through here, and then also a little bit of a grassy area here, and then some kind of rocks as it comes towards the shore area. Okay, so you can probably not see that very well, but I've just roughly sketched out the painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet my paper where I want to paint the sky. So I'm just using clean water here and a flat angled brush, and what I'm doing is kind of outlining the shape of the mountains, and I'm only wetting the paper behind the mountains, so the skyline, because we're going to work on that section first. Okay, so once I've saturated that paper, so that is my wet process. I'm going to add wet paint into that to kind of blur it all together so that we have a really nice soft skyline here. So what I've done is I took a little bit of blue and a little bit of black, okay, and I'm making this kind of grayish blue color. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is take my wet pigment here and I'm going to drop it into the skyline. Okay, all right, so what I want to have is variations of this blue so that we have different shades of the sky. Maybe there's a storm coming in. So we're going to run that pigment into the paper. As it dries, it's going to kind of blur and blend together. And then for good measure, I'm just going to put a little bit of purple in as well to kind of give you a little bit more dimension. All right, and then I'm going to blur that out by just adding some water. So do you see how those colors kind of blur together? And it'll be a nice soft, kind of like a sunsetty dark skyline there. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing down here with the water line, but what I'm going to do is not add as much pigment because I want the water to be very soft. Okay, so I've wet the surface here, and I'm going to take a little bit of blue paint. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just thin it out by adding water. So that's the beauty of watercolors, is if you want your colors to be a little bit softer or not as pigment, just add more water. Okay, so I'm just doing like a small section of this blue that's barely there to do kind of your water line. We don't want it super saturated. We want it to be very, very soft. All right, so now I'm going to work kind of on this mountain range. So for the mountains, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to wet this surface, but I want to be very careful because if I wet this, you can see the colors kind of bleed together. So I'm kind of going up to the skyline there, but I'm not going into it. That way it's very, very soft. Okay, so here I'm just going to put my mountains in and move the pigment down. I'm just going to be pretty loose with it. Okay, so I'm using this basic gray. I'm not adding any more pigments to it. Okay, and what I'm doing here is I'm kind of moving that water up away from it so it doesn't bleed into the mountain. So now I'm going to take my gray. I'm going to mix it with a smidge of green to kind of give you like a grayish green to add dimension to the mountains. Okay, so I'm just kind of making these kind of angular. So I'm doing my strokes kind of like an angle stroke rather than trying to be super soft with it. Okay, and then the beauty of this is once this is all dried down, I will come back with a pen and kind of define this range here. All right, so I just want to kind of blend this down so it meets the water here. Okay, and be soft. I'm going to add just a smidge of black into this mountain range because I'm starting to get to the point that they're blurring together and I want them to kind of stand out a little bit. So doing these different shades of grays and blacks and greens will give an illusion that there is dimension there and that the surface isn't so flat. Okay, see, I'm trying to do more angular motions for there. Okay, so I'm going to add just a little bit more blue down here to my water line just to kind of keep it blue. I'm going to add a little bit more to the edge so that we have a nice strong distinction between the water line and then also the mountain line. Okay, then I'm going to have this grassy area over here, so I'm going to make sure I clean off my brush so that I have good clean water here. This is going to be the grassy area. Now we're not going to do grass green. We're not going to take our green and just stick it straight on there. You can see how green that is, right? I'm going to take my green, I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it and then a smidge of black. Okay, so we can see that's too much black, so I'm going to put a little bit more green into it, and I'm also going to hit it with a little bit of brown to warm that green up. There we go. Okay, and the beauty of this is that if you get it the wrong color, you can always fix it. All right, so I'm just going to kind of hit this surface, leaving space between my green spatches so that I have variations of dark and light to give some good contrast. All right, and then I'm just going to hit this green area, and then I'm just going to let it softly bleed down to the edge of the paper. Okay, and then I'm just going to hit it with a little bit more greens because we want lots of variation of these colors so that we have nice depth and contrast on the surface. There we go. Okay, so now what we're going to do is let this dry, and then we're going to come back with an ink pen and do some line drawing on top of it. Okay, so now that this is completely dry, well, it's a little damp, but that's okay. I'm going to use a ink pen. So this is a fine point graphic pen. I got it at Hobby Lobby. It is a 0.3 pen. It is a water and fade pen, fade proof, so that it shouldn't bleed, but my paper is still just a slightly bit damp. So it may bleed a little bit, which I'm okay with that line being a little bit softer. As you can see, it has a very small tip on it. Okay. And what I'm going to do is do a line drawing on top of this painting to kind of accentuate some of these shapes and kind of give it a little bit of a different line quality. Everything here is very, very soft, but then once I draw on top of it, it's going to have a more graphic approach. So I'm going to start down here in the grassy area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of outline the shapes of these rocks. And I'm not going to be very precise. I just want some basic shapes. Okay, so I'm doing my grass line here, and I'm outlining some of these shapes that I painted with when I was making up the pattern. And just kind of have like a very loose freehand drawing with it. Okay, so I'm gonna do the same thing over here, kind of outlining the water line, and then I'm gonna make some lines through here that will give you movement. So see how the lines are swirling across? So that way it looks kind of like water is moving. All right. Then we're going to come through and outline the mountains. Okay, so we have our mountain ranges. Make a little bit of jagged lines to kind of mimic some rock formations maybe. Okay, do the same thing up here. So we have our jagged mountain range here. Okay, up through here. Okay, so this is going to kind of extend down here. All right, I'm going to come on this side so that these jagged lines will give you different layers of the mountain range so that it's not a flat drawing. So now we have some dimension that will give you some proportions and also some perspective. Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of extra line work down here at the bottom so that we have a good distinction between the water and mountain range. Okay, and then lastly up here, I'm going to kind of make some shapes into the sky that's going to mimic clouds. Okay, so we're just being very loose with our drawing. All right, and then so now that we have our pencil work done, or pen work done, if you see some areas that might need fixed, this is a good opportunity to do it. So I lost some of my blues as this dried down in my water. So I want to come back and just kind of bring those back so that we have a lot of different values in this water line so it's not so flat. Okay, so I just added a little bit of blue and I'm just going to take my fingers and kind of blur it out. Okay, put some blue over there. And I'm going to put a little bit more of the same blue up into the sky because we lost a little bit of blues there. Okay, so there we go. So the artwork now is finished. So as always, we must sign our name so that we know who created this masterpiece. Guys, I hope you really enjoy this technique. It's a really beautiful technique. It lets you kind of have the water move around and create different layers with your pigment. It's one of my favorite processes because I feel like it's very easy to remedy mistakes if you need to go back and fix things. And it creates a really beautiful, soft painting. So lastly, now that we finished, we signed our name, I am now going to peel the tape off. The most satisfying. And then that will reveal your very clean edge of your painting. Okay, well, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and I'd love to see you try out this technique.